Mr. Speaker.
Order. Questions for oral answer. Mr. Saktiandi.
Mr. Speaker, may I have your permission to answer questions numbers 1 to 6 as part of ministerial statements delivered by me and Minister for Transport, Mr. S. Iswaran, later in the sitting, please?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Mr. Impaling.
Question number 7.
Mr. Speaker, sir, may I have your permission to answer oral questions numbers 7 to 32 as part of the 3 ministerial statements to be delivered by the Minister for Communications and Information and Minister in charge of Smart Nation and Cyber Security, Ms. Josephine Teo, and the Minister of State for Ministry of Home Affairs, Mr. Desmond Tan, and myself at tomorrow's sitting?
Yes, you may. Mrs. Zulkarnain.
Thank you, sir. I should also ask for a ministerial statement. I thank the member for the question. In respect of the case, the Police's Internal Affairs Office has completed its internal investigations relating to the police IO investigation officer and his supervisor. Generally, the IAO, Internal Affairs Office, will take this approach. 1, look at the facts of the case, the actions of the officers involved, how they have handled any lapses. 2, listen to the explanations given by the officers, assess and recommend the disciplinary action, if any, to be taken. When the IAO started its investigations against the 2 officers, I made clear the following 2 points. These are points I've made in the past as well, in the House as well as outside. First, our approach must always be to do our duty, conduct the investigations without fear or favor. Second, at the same time, we do not look to scapegoat or act unfairly. We do not go out to blame and punish just because there has been a lot of public interest in the matter and because some call for heavy punishment. We must deal with the case as we would deal with any other case, regardless of publicity, and we must deal with it professionally and properly. That's extremely important for the public and the police to know. Police officers have to often exercise their judgment and discretion in the course of their duties, sometimes on an urgent basis, but always under some sort of pressure. And we want our police officers to be confident in exercising their discretion when they are performing their duties. We cannot fault officers just because we think, with the benefit of hindsight, that we would have exercised our discretion differently in their situation, or just because we do not agree with their judgment or exercise of discretion. And the officers must know that action will be taken against them only if there are discipline issues or misconduct or some breach. And the management culture, all the way from the top, must be that we ask that the matter be dealt with fairly, be prepared to explain in public what action is fair and why. The investigations in this case found that both the IO and his supervisor had neglected their duties. Neglect of duty means the failure to take proper action to perform a required task. Penalty for neglect of duty depends on the officer's degree of culpability and the harm caused by their actions. Penalties can range from a reprimand, a financial penalty, to demotion and dismissal from service. The maximum financial penalty imposed under the Public Service Commission Delegation of Disciplinary Functions Directions is a fine equivalent to the stoppage of increment for 2 years. There are, of course, more severe penalties possible under legislation, and that really depends on the conduct. The IO who handled the police report handled it as a routine theft case, and it was so. But there were some lapses. The lapses include the fact that the IO did not visit the scene of crime promptly to carry out investigation and gather evidence. This contributed to a break in the chain of custody for some exhibits. Second, the IO did not properly verify some of the claims made by the parties during the investigations. Third, his supervisor did not provide sufficient guidance, which contributed to the lapses. The IAO also took into account the intense pressure under which the IO was working under. He was handling many ongoing investigations, prosecutions, conducting arrest operations at the same time. I have spoken before about the workload challenges that police investigation officers face. The only way to deal with this is to increase police headcount. We have not solved that issue yet. It's a difficult problem, not easily solvable because of the general manpower shortage. In the event, a financial penalty equivalent to the medium range was imposed on both officers for neglect of duty. The Public Service Commission, as the authority for disciplinary control of civil servants, has concurred with the penalty imposed on both officers. As I said, the two police officers were doing their jobs under difficult circumstances, and up until this incident, they have discharged their duties, dutifully, one could say. I have sympathy for the situation they find themselves in, but they have fallen short of expectations, and they have been dealt with in the way other officers have been dealt with, would have been dealt with in similar circumstances. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Zulkarnain.
Thank you, Minister, for the clarifications and the answer. I'm heartened to see that we are putting our officers at the heart and front and center of the things that we do, even during investigations. Our officers are all human beings, and they face pressures of family, professionally and personally as well. I'm heartened that there is some form of review on the workload distribution and the manpower challenges. And in this regard, may I ask if there are any avenues for our officers to actually escalate the pressures of the workload or the stresses that they're facing both at work and elsewhere within the institution of the police organization and the investigation body. So whether or not there could be a bit more support in terms of counseling, mentorship perhaps. I note that the supervisor in this case have been found to have lapsed in his supervision, but could there have been other channels of oversight or avenues for the officer to escalate his stresses and the pressures that he may have faced? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll make 2 points in response. First, we put the officers at the heart of what we do because there is something even more central and fundamental, which is public interest. The officers are there to serve public interest, and when public interest is affected in some way, we have to take action. But the institution can only do well if the officers are treated fairly. The officers have to be treated fairly so that they can do their job and so that public interest, which is the fundamental, primary, central goal is achieved. So it's not putting officers above the public, but serving the public through making sure that there is a strong institution. And in order for there to be a strong institution, there have got to be good officers who know that they will be treated fairly. So that's the approach. On the second point, how do we take care of the officers? There are many avenues. In every context, there are officers, senior officers, who are tasked to take feedback, collect, understand, and in fact, part of leadership that is being emphasized, not just in the SPF, but in other places too, is to make sure that the morale of your officers remains high. Surveys, both internal surveys as well as independent surveys, show that the morale of police officers is high, and the public confidence in the police force, despite some scurrilous attempts by some third parties to continuously run down the police, remains extremely high. A Singapore police officer, contrary to the way people perceive police forces in many other parts of the world, the Singapore police officer is held in very high esteem, very high regard. And we have to continue with that. As to whether we can do more, I have explained the difficulties. The fundamental difficulty is there aren't enough officers. And there is only so much more that you can do when your central problem is that there is more work that can reasonably be done by the workforce we have. And I've said we do our best in those circumstances. Thank you.
Ms. Sylvia Lim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two supplementary questions for Minister on what he just told the House. First, he mentioned that the punishment that was recommended to the two officers, meaning the IO and his supervisor, was a fine which was equivalent to a stoppage of pay, or something along those lines. So I'd like to ask him whether he means that the officers concerned will not receive their pay for a few months. That's the first question. And the second question is, were the IO and the supervisor punished similarly? In other words, was one assigned more responsibility than the other? And will one have stoppage of more months of pay compared to the other? Thank you.
I thank the member for that question. In context, what happened is that they lost, a fine was imposed on them, plus, in addition, a number of months of increment is foregone. So there were actually two penalties imposed on them. Now, the number of months differs for the two officers, but as I said, it's at the midpoint on what could have been imposed. And how the two officers were approached on the respective roles that they played.